So there are really two topics ahead of us, and we can see if we can intertwine these two topics. Now, you must have noticed that the Olympics have now come and gone. And one characteristic of all those who participate in the Olympics is they had to do training, extensive training. And many of them had to be involved in communal sports, that is, team sports. So what is my point? My point is, in training, there are obvious obstacles. Let us take team sports, rugby, soccer, hockey, etc. All these team sports have what are called, in competitive sports anyway, opposition players. Now, it doesn't seem to be much fun if you have a sport with no opposition players. No opposition players, no goal, no spectators. Any sport requires all of these. But even if you're doing individual sports, you have to overcome a number of obstacles. Confidence, for example, stamina, or lack of stamina. You have to overcome any reluctance to take up a discipline called training. So you'll find that there are many, many obstacles. The body presents an obstacle, the mind presents an obstacle. And in life, of course, we have a number of obstacles, but obstacles are not a bad thing. And you can handle them in two ways, three ways, I suppose. One is to say there's an obstacle, there's a full stop. We go in a different direction. We won't even face it. Another way is to learn how can we get around the obstacle. Can we learn a technique to do that? That requires a sporting attitude. And so I suppose there's another option, and that is to fight the obstacle, to smash into it. Now, the smashing into it creates friction. It's not an entirely satisfactory method. But if we can glide across the obstacle by finding a way around it, that seems to me the best way. And all those who won Olympic medals, gold, silver, bronze, whatever they were able to efficiently get around the obstacles. Those who got around the obstacles successfully, quickly, with confidence, they got medals. Of course, others may have also succeeded in their own way. They may not have got medals, but the principle is always the same. When we talk of the ultimate goal of life, therefore, and the ultimate goal of life we define not as heaven, not as a post-mortem condition, but freedom. At the moment, we're not free. At the moment, we are physically bound. That will end soon. So we were discussing earlier, who will go first? We can take bets on it. Statistically, I'm probably the one who goes first. But not necessarily, not necessarily. So this is something that we don't really know. Those who can look into the palm could know, or maybe look into the astrology. But we are not living in a deterministic world in that sense. It's not a fatalistic world, but it is a causal world. Every cause has its effect. The idea of the causal law is like this. It's like waves in an ocean. The cause of a hollow is a wave, and the cause of the next wave is a hollow. What is the difference between the cause and effect? Nothing. One is more subtle, that's all. The other one is more gross. The cause of this human body is how we think and how we thought. And it produces the effect called body, which we can see as an opportunity. Using the body, using the faculties of the mind, such as dedication, determination, concentration, we can overcome the obstacles of limitations. So physical limitations are presented not as so much an obstacle. Many people fall into ill health and consider it to be an obstacle. The body is an obstacle. We don't have to consider it to be like that. We can consider it in a different way. We can think of it as an instrument, as a tool that we can use for our freedom. The mind is a tool that we use for our freedom. One is external, one is internal, or it's categorized in this way. Looked at in a different way, body and mind is just cause and effect, and both of them, if we use the wave analogy, the ocean analogy, both of them are the same body of water. So we have divided things into cause and effect, as well as a fundamental substance that simply lies there deep enough, neither to come nor to go, and has no causality within it. There's no cause, no effect. It remains constant. And that is deemed to be your true nature. How do we find it? By fighting? No. By running away? No. There's one thing we have to apply, and that is a higher principle of non-demanding love. So that spiritual life, in other words, getting this freedom, is not like acquiring something, like a gold or a medal in the Olympics. It is simply removing the obstacles that are seemingly obscuring your own internal glory. Your glory is there, just as the sun's glory is there, but may be obscured by a number of clouds. The clouds will move on. In fact, naturally, the clouds move on. In spiritual life, we have a way of moving them on, or in other words, removing obstacles. Fear of death is an obstacle, for example, but all of these fears are based on a misunderstanding of the presented world in front of us. And so we're going to resort to this language of obstacles that is contained in the yoga dedicated to meditation. That methodology is called Raja Yoga or Dhyana Yoga, meditation. There in the second chapter, the author of these Patanjali Yoga Sutras, naturally Patanjali, and he gives a very succinct way of looking at things because it's presented as sutras, just mere threads that require comprehensive commentaries. In front of me will be the commentary of Vyasa, but even his commentary requires another commentary done by Vachaspati. Vachaspati's gloss will be there to explain what the commentary means on these sutras, these bare threads. Sometimes a word, sometimes 2, 3 words. And if you just are presented with words, you have no idea what their meaning is. It requires commentary. A living commentator is necessary, called a teacher. But the second chapter, 4 chapters, just to remind you, in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra body, there are 4 sections. And the first section lays out the basic principle. Second section naturally lays out the practice. The third one lays out the effects of your practice. And the fourth one lays out the ultimate result, namely this independence, ultimate freedom. Now, how can you describe freedom if nobody has it? We may feel a sense of it from time to time, but it is all conditioned. So where do we find ourselves in taking the conditions seriously? This is our first obstacle and is the mother of all the other obstacles. Namely, our fundamental nature is fixed. Our fundamental nature never changes. Our fundamental nature is entirely infinite, is always poised and beaming. Because of its presence, things move. What we call nature, according to the system, or the ultimate Vedanta system, I should say, is not responsible for any of these movements and changes. It's not an independent thing. It only operates because of its proximity with what we call Purusha, an indwelling entity. Just like work is done when the manager of an office is present, or things happen in a city if there is a mayor looking after things. When the mayor is on holiday, the city relaxes and goes into decay. It is only when the administrative person comes back that things are then put into place and handled correctly. In the same way, we have an internal administrator, a presence, a monarch of the city, which we call body. And for this reason, Katha Upanishad calls this a body, an 11-gated city. And inside that is one which is unborn, whose consciousness is not flickering. Just like a flame normally flickers, you can imagine a flame that never flickers. It always remains constant. So that constant thing, what is the benefit of accessing to it? Well, you're accessing freedom, and with it, joy. With it, all the higher emotions that come manifest as the highest qualities in human nature. We rate these qualities very highly. Moral living, noble thoughts, love, compassion. All of these noble qualities are simply because our internal nature is a pristine source of it. And moral behavior and all these other qualities of truth and beauty and goodness and love and so on are manifested versions only because these are inherent within us. How to discover it? The whole of spiritual life, therefore, is a question of skillfully, playfully, artistically, joyfully removing the obstacles. Not by taking them one by one, but finding a way around them so that they are no longer in our way. They're no longer inhibiting our progress, just as the clouds seem to inhibit the sunshine. But actually, no, the sun is never inhibited. Only the clouds have to move on. How to move the clouds of ignorance along? We have to raise up the antidote, which is called knowledge. So Patanjali gives us 5 obstacles. And the key obstacle will be what is described as ignorance. Having said that, we have to cultivate practice. So he starts off, Patanjali, with a chapter that begins straight away with the idea of tapaha. It begins with the idea of how do we cultivate it? Mortification, study, surrendering fruits of work to God. It is, a whole thing comes under the subject of what is called purifying actions or kriya. So the whole sutra will go tapaha, swadhyaya, ishvara pranidhana, and eventually it says kriya and yoga. Tapaha means purificatory actions. It's as if there's some stain in the mental field which has to be removed. And how do we remove it? We make something better, dilute it, until ultimately it disappears. If you have some kind of spillage on a table, you'll take a cloth, you'll rub it gently and systematically. Instead of making a bigger mess and rubbing the stain in, you remove the stain. And you remove that stain by developing the will, by developing the attitude of discernment, discerning what is the truth, and by also engaging in removing any sense that there's an absence within me that has to be filled from the outside. It's called the removal of desires within you, because the desires are associated with an interpretation of this world as a reality. What do we mean by reality? Reality, the thing that never changes. What we typically call reality is the thing that always changes. We've mixed up our terminology and our concepts. So purificatory action, Patanjali will describe exactly what that means. And then worship of God or study Study, he will describe study as repetition of your mantra, repetition of a mantra, japa in other words. Japa is a purifying, systematic process that is highly effectual. And then, in terms of all the actions that we are doing, making the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Ruler, the Supreme one that gives us regularity and rhythm to our own being and to that of the entire universe, what religion calls God, what we call Ishvara, that is the Lord, the one that is the ancient one by whose presence laws are being regulated and made at the most intimate level, as well as the most remote cosmic level. The whole of physics, science of physics, runs on these laws, but you also have laws. There are laws of respiration. There are laws of structure, skeletal structure. There are dietary laws. There are laws which allow certain substances to be consumed. We can't eat grass, that's very clear. We're not constituted to do it. There are certain laws that regulate the way we take raw material in and convert it into energy. These are some examples. There are laws about the rate of your heart, your heartbeat. And at the cellular level, there are remarkable laws. The external environment in a single cell is capable of creating a message from far away, relatively speaking, to the central nucleus of your cell. It's as if there is a metro network from the edge of your cell. And just to give you an understanding of that, supposing you are to, well, let's take our neighbor, yeah? Let's take United Kingdom of Great Britain. You can visualize it on a map. And where, let us say, London is, you take something the size of, let us say, a tennis ball, put it on the map. You'll hardly be able to see it. Then the next thing you do is you make a circle around that, whose circumference, the edge of the circumference, is somewhere around Edinburgh. Means it'll overlap the British Isles a little bit. Now that distance is being covered, and so a message from the external needs carrying instructions is carried all that distance in a few seconds in the cell. It's a remarkable thing. It's as if there's a network of subterranean trains, the metro, if you like, or the underground in UK. So that's a remarkable thing. How does that happen? Why does it happen? It says to us all, there's an intelligence within the cell that enables this to happen. And there's a whole chemical process that allows it, and so on and so forth. Previously, people had thought all the intelligence in the cell, all the structural information in the cell is contained in the genome. That is the structure which is DNA. The DNA is the independent thing where everything and everything is responsible for that, and it never changes, and so on and so forth. Experimentation has shown it's not exactly true. It does have an architectural plan, no doubt, but it is all constructed of proteins. And how is that regulated? How is the instructions given to it? It's given through a whole complex system of functional things. I'm using highly technical terms, as you know, things within the cell. And these, within the membrane of the cell, this is really carrying out all the modifications, instructions, repair work, and we really have only touched the surface of understanding this. Much research has been done on it. So what is my point? My point is that there is some intelligent principle in us that is regulating things And the wonder of it is we haven't got a clue about it. We simply take it for granted. If we really understood it, wouldn't we feel a tremendous sense of thankfulness? Wouldn't worship, spontaneous adoration and worship arise from this? And so, making this principle, intelligent principle, the motive of your action, that is the yoga of action. Then offering all the fruits of your activity to that. So these various things are put there. That is tapaha, shwadhyaya, Ishvara pranintana, worship of this entity, and offering the fruits of all your actions to this entity in a spontaneous sense of or spirit of gratitude. And yoga is not attained by one who's not given to this purificatory action. It goes on like that. The question is that the fruit of concentration or effort and the means, they have been described, even in the first chapter they were described. And then we find out, or we have to ask the question, what's the necessity of writing any second chapter in these Yoga Sutras? But it's only practice and desirelessness that have been mentioned there in that first chapter to be the means. But the exact details of the means is now mentioning. But what is the aim of all this? It is to remove obstacles. And for this reason, these obstacles, which are called kleshas, technically, they are laid out. I'm going to quote from Swami Vivekananda's interpretation because he's gone to these original texts and commentators and beautifully summarized the whole thing in his commentary on the Yoga Sutras. So he doesn't call them simply obstacles. In fact, that's not really what it means. These are specific types of obstacles. They bring pain. These are pain-bearing obstacles or obstructions. Now, if you ask, why should we remove these obstacles? The answer is very clear. Because they're productive of pain, and when you complain, I'm unhappy, or I feel pain in any way, emotional pain, or whatever it is, or some kind of mood depression, well, this kind of pain is because you have an obstacle and it's still there and requires removing. So these are the obstacles. The obstacles are, quite clearly, ignorance. Ignorance is the first thing, what we call nescience, avidya. Avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. These are the various kleshas. So let's deal with the last one first. Clinging to life. Now there's another question that was asked prior to us recording this and so on. What happens after the physical body dies? Is there something which is there? Well, the primary obstacle for our understanding is this very last one. It is this clinging to life, this love of life. And where does it come from? It comes from all the preceding ones. There's a causal chain effect. Ignorance, that is nescience of our own nature, that's the first thing. Ignorance of the reality of things. We're looking at life and we are misunderstanding it. We're taking seriously the 5 photographs of this universe that we're dealing with, namely through the 5 senses. That's our interpretation of life. And because of that, we develop a position where we as individuals have to go and deal with it, struggle against it. This is not dealing with obstacles. This is equivalent to assuming that these obstacles are permanent fixtures and that I am a permanent fixture, not understanding that this permanent fixture is not permanent at all. It will go. There are no permanent habitats in life, absolutely not. So this is called asmita, egoism, which is the identification of the ultimate seer with the seen. the ultimate pristine Purusha within us, identifying with the psychophysical, the body and mind complex, and summarized it as asmita, that means my existence independent. Now, that kind of approach will not be very helpful. The idea of having an ego is helpful. It gives us a sense of empowerment. But when we are touching this sense of empowerment or sense of individuality with ignorance, we are making a severe mistake. We are owning something and taking credit for our actions. We might call it the prophet-actor complex. We have no right to do it because it's not ours. So we live in a kind of bubble with me at the center, this asmita, I at the center, and all people and places and events opposite us, and struggling and reacting. Struggling to survive and reacting when to keep that survival. And that then gives us a sense of clinging to life. And how will we operate in terms of sustaining it? Well, we know what we like and we know what we don't. We have attachment and aversion. We are attached to something that we like, and we have an aversion to things that we do not like. I have an attraction for when I was given a prize, let us say at the age of 10, but the following year when I went up for a prize, I tripped and fell, and all my schoolmates laughed, and I don't want to face that. That I want to avoid, so I don't even include it in my memory recall. The record is there, but I don't want to bring it out. There's an example of how we go through life, going between this pain and pleasure, attachment, aversion, fear, doubt on the one side, and love on the other side, or positivity on the other side. We can say pain and pleasure. But all of these obstacles are pain-bearing. They bring pain with them. That's the point. This is why we should see if we can deal with them and remove them. So now let us see. The afflictions are the 5 forms of unreal cognition. And when quick with life, they render the rule of the qualities. So, ignorance is the productive field of everything that follows. If we are to overcome ignorance, then we've taken the support for all the others away. Anyway, it doesn't answer the question, what happens when, in the face of this obstacle of being attached to life, what becomes of us, central being, when the body dies? Well, there are several possible options. Supposing we think that we are the body, then naturally when the body goes, we think we have just disappeared. This is why people grieve. But that's not the case. We can consider the body just like a pillowcase or a housing or a car in which we occupy it. In other words, it has nothing to do with me, it's an instrument of me. When I say my shoe, I don't say I'm the shoe. When I say my car, I don't say I'm the car. When I say me, what it means is I am that which sits behind the instrumentality and is used in an instrumental way. It has a function, kriya, a function. Now, that being said, we know the principle of the mistake, but how to get out of the strong attachment to the body and mind complex, which we say is an individuality? That's a very interesting question. So the body is like a carcass, naturally, which has depleted its functionality. We call this death. When people ask me, how are you? Well, my standard reply, I'm well if you're well. But really, you see, if I were to think as Ramakrishna thought, or as Mahapurush Maharaj, Swami Shivananda thought, he said in the midst of tremendous suffering, physical suffering, he says, I'm fine, I'm well, only the body has a little trouble. Or Ramakrishna suffering from the throat cancer, I mentioned it before. Yes, I'm well, but a little trouble in the throat. So you can see these people are naturally dissociating in any way from a sense of ownership or identity with the object which is there in front of them. They are realistic to know there's an object. In other words, they have removed the solution of ignorance or nescience. So what is this ignorance? The 5 pains, the 5-fold tie that binds us down and prevents us from our freedom. Ignorance is the cause, the other 4 are its effects. It's the only cause of all our misery. What else can make us miserable? The nature of the soul, what is it? It is eternal bliss. It is eternal bliss. What can make it sorrowful? Except ignorance, hallucination, delusion. In other words, we're all running around or walking in a kind of haze of dream, which we feel is reality. So what can make it sorrowful except ignorance, says Swami Vivekananda in his commentary. Hallucination, delusion, he puts a question mark. All pain of the soul is simply delusion. So when somebody says, oh, I'm going through a psychological crisis, I feel everything is painful and so on. Well, practically speaking, we can't say, well, you're suffering from delusion, but internally we could think such a thing about ourselves and others. You won't say, it doesn't happen to me, only to others. Yes, we are all caught in it. So what is ignorance? Well, it's the productive field of all of these that follow, whether they are what is called dormant or attenuated or overpowered or expanded. What does it mean? It means whether they are fine and controlled, or whether they are repressed, or whether they are expressed. With whatever they are. Then Swami Vivekananda gives us this beautiful commentary. Ignorance is the cause of egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life. These impressions exist in different states. They are sometimes dormant. You often hear the expression, innocent as a baby. Yet in the baby may be the state of a demon or of a god, which will come out by degrees. In the yogi, these impressions, the samskaras, left by past actions, are attenuated, that is, exist in a very fine state, and he can control them and not allow them to become manifest. There's a discussion I heard once, curious discussion, because Adolf Hitler is portrayed as the demon of the 20th century. And the question is, if you knew what Hitler was going to be, would you have killed Hitler as a baby since he killed so many others? And the one who cleverly answered, no, I wouldn't be able to kill a baby, but I could kill him as a teenager. So the teenager problem comes out and shows what wasn't there, obviously, as a baby. Overpowered means that sometimes one set of impressions is held down for a while by those that are stronger, but they come out when that repressing cause is removed. And the last state is the expanded state, when the subtle impressions in the psyche, which we call samskaras, having helped surroundings attain to a great activity, either as good or as evil. So the psychology of it is this, that our compounded sense of ignorance about the world around us and about our own nature is responsible for actions, and all actions, even thoughts, are instantly recorded in a kind of unconscious library. And these come out sometimes, and sometimes they remain dormant. But this is the evidence of our one thing, and that is psychological ignorance. Ignorance, what is it? It's very beautifully described. Ignorance is defined as taking the non-eternal, the impure, the painful, and the non-self for the eternal, the pure, the happy, and the internal Atman or self, respectively. So there's a definition what that means, what this nescience means. It goes like this: Avijyakshetram utaresham prasupta tanu vichina udaranam is a list of understandings. Again, it's not a constructed sentence. Nescience is the field to the others, whether dormant or what have you, whatever condition it is. And then it gives this description. What is it? It is the non-eternal, anitya, ashuchi, the impure, dukkha, the painful, anatman, what is not the self. All of these is taken to be the reality. The eternal, the pure, the pleasurable, Atman, the soul, and Kyatihi, that is supposing or taking to be, this is all contributing toward what is called avidya, nescience. So then what is egoism? How does that come out? And what has this to do with death? If we fear death, it is because of this ignorance, not surviving, not continuing eternally, leaving off the eternal. But egoism, what is it? It's the identification of the true seer, which is behind everything, with the instrument of seeing. And the description will go like this: the seer is really the self, the pure one, the ever holy, the infinite, the immortal. This is the internal, eternal self of man. And what are the instrumental? Now, we already described the geography of the mind as mind stuff, chitta, buddhi, determinative faculty, manas, the mind, the indriyas, the internal sense organs, and so on. This combined is called the internal instrument. And so these are the instruments. And when we identify with these instruments, no longer thinking that they're instruments, then we have that difficulty, that problem. And then attachment is that which dwells on pleasure, and aversion is that which dwells on pain. And flowing through its own nature and established even in the learned, is the most difficult, that is the clinging to life. Now we can deal with this question of what happens. So I began by saying we live in a determinate universe. A universe of cause and effect. That's the environmental structure around us. And so therefore, whatever we did which is good, whatever we did which is not good, will live with us. Even if the body goes away, that accumulated experience is moving on with an urge to continue our journey and fulfill all our desires. Desire is what drives us on. So if we look at the Chandogya Upanishad, I said we did mention it, we can see clearly, and we find it throughout the literature, including the Bhagavad Gita, there's something that is described as the northern path and the southern path. That is symbolized between the sun and the moon. So when the body goes, we are taken on a kind of journey. Now, if we have led a good life, described actually as if we had performed our religious duties. What are religious duties? Described as generally leading a good life, not just a moral life, not just an ethical life, but having an element of faith, but we certainly haven't got our freedom. Then we go to what is called the southern route, which is the land, as it were, of the ancestors. And there we're guided there, and there we spend our pocket money called karma. All the effects of our actions, we spend. Our good actions, we spend. Of course, if our whole psyche is dominated by evil actions, then there are 7 worlds that we can go to, and there are a number of heavens we can go to as well. But several of those, in other words, we go into regression. In any event, when we have spent our karma, we don't get anything new. We spend our pocket money. We saved up during the lifetime, and we spend it in our holiday camp, the world of the ancestors, described symbolically as the moon, because the moon doesn't have a light of its own. It's reflected light, and the moon is associated with the mind, and it is through the mind that we got to where we were. And so that is deemed to be, this is the place of the ancestors, metaphorically speaking. The other path is, if you had an intense love of God and realized that personal God in this life, you go to the line of the sun, or described as the world of Brahma. And there you can linger until ultimately you glide into your own freedom, or you are reborn again as a liberated soul or a teacher, and there you then teach others. So these are the 2 paths. Now it raises some questions. Well, what happens again, you see, if you're spending demerit, if that's your consequence, well, then you have to be born again as a person. Even if you did something good, as I mentioned, you have to come again as a person, and you have to continue your journey. Why should your journey finish if this instrumentation became old and rocky and you didn't reach your destination? The infinite mercy of the universe tells us we have infinite numbers of chances to come again. And there's a great description in Chandogya Upanishad of how we go. We go through fire, as it were, elemental fire. We go through the water, as it were. We come out as rain, as it were, and the rain sustains grains, for example, and the grains that provides energy, and the water that comes into the semen, and the seed then continues the life, and so on. It's described like that. Then what happens about those souls that are entirely evil? Their regression is much more, of course, and they come into this existence in a crude form. And what about those creatures who don't have any merit at all? You must have noticed how awkward mosquitoes are. Well, mosquitoes, they bite, they go on, they move on, but you see, they don't go according to any pathway whatsoever. Anyway, that's a kind of aside. The main point is this. Right now, we have an opportunity not just to be good people, but to exceed that. We have the capacity and the functionality to be a living transformer, transforming all these obstacles that we have, so-called, into something fruitful. This transformational energy, we can use an example of the rose flower, who doesn't rely on a rose flower for its beauty and growth, but relies on the various components of nature, including things that we don't like, called manure. From manure, the rose flower grows. What a beautiful example of transformation. We have the capacity for transformation. We are living transformers, transforming negatives into positives, making everybody smile and leaving shining eyes behind us. This is our capacity. Every human encounter, we have that. Swami Vivekananda even put it in a physical way, saying, if you learn to smile, in a genuine way, of course, then that reflects on your own psyche and your environment around you. And there's an absolutely indelible law of nature that as you think, so you become. Every thought which is negative will result in a negative environment for you. Every positive thought that you have, joyful thought, will result in a joyful, positive environment for you, consisting of various people, places, and events. You create your own world and you're constantly doing it. Now, the whole thing can be viewed in a different way. And that is that this post-mortem condition, where you go to the path of the sun, path of the moon, various heavens, various hells, and so on and so forth, all of this is within the relative world. And when we realize our own freedom, because that's the other path, in neither sun nor moon, that is, you can be liberated in this life itself. In other words, you're free to purchase a one-way ticket rather than a return ticket. So this is the way that we are encouraging. We are saying, realize your own freedom. Get rid of this ignorance, which constitutes weakness. Get knowledge instead, real knowledge, real understanding. And the ignorance goes away just as night is replaced by day when the sun comes in. The sun, as it were, chases away the darkness of the night, as it were. So the reality is that when we go toward this highest principle in a dedicated way, in a concentrated way, we access our own freedom simply by not acquiring anything different or anything new, but just removing the things which are in the way. Like an elephant will remove trees and so on, or a tractor remove something. When you want to build a building, the first thing you do is you don't just suddenly put bricks there. What you'd have to do is you have to clear the land. So you have to remove all the obstacles that might be in your way when you want to create a structure. So in the same way, you remove the various obstacles, starting with ignorance. When we are doing the Enneagram, which we'll be doing this coming weekend, the greatest obstacle that we have would be this primary production of ignorance, which is called asmita, that is, this egoism. This egoism, otherwise known as a kind of mask, but the important thing is we sit behind the mask with the capacity to change it. And if there wasn't that capacity there, if we were the mask, if we were the personality, as is often identified, we have no possibility of changing it. We can only change something which is not our own nature. If it is our own nature, we cannot change it. So the ancient seers understood what the post-mortem condition will look like, but all of it, from the Vedantic point of view, comes under the realm of Maya or ignorance. Ignorance, Maya is the same thing. Maya is that kind of presentation to us that somehow convinces us that this world is reality. And it's not. Even just a cursory look at it will show us it cannot be. It is always changing. And there are no permanent habitats, even in the body. And so we'll leave it there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.